Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Last Thursday. Excited for this one. We're talking Woodstock tonight, and we're joined with our very special guest, Pedro.
Hello, Internet.
So when we first started talking about this episode that we were going to talk about Woodstock, Pedro was like, oh, dude, I would totally join you. Oh. Okay, that was YouTube.
Yes.
All right. Want to say hi, Bob?
Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well. I too am stoked to have Pedro here. He's a friend in the flesh, and he has great opinions about things. And we're here to catch up on all things Woodstock. I think he's a good match for the show, and then also for this topic for a few different reasons. So, anyway, looking forward to it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Heck yeah.
Excited to talk about whatever BS we always like to talk about.
Yeah, we were talking about it. It's like we typically are talking about these conversations like, you know, in our own little circle. And so it's fun to open it up to you guys on the internet. So thanks for being here. As always, thanks to all the patrons. I've been throwing support our way. Super appreciate it very much. All y'all are up on the screen. And, you know, you guys are helping us keep these wheels turning. Seriously, it means a lot to see you guys rolling in. So thank you so much. And anyone who wants to become a patron of The Healing Home, you can go to patreon.com/The Healing Home. With that said, I say let's jump into it, because with Woodstock, there's a lot to talk about. But first, we have a special drink that we're all having. As usual, in Last Thursday fashion, we have a special drink. This is a peach fizz. So with it's a mocktail, no alcohol in this one. Our buddy Jacob canned a bunch of peaches and gave us some. So it's peach and lime with some ginger beer and cherry.
Sweet.
Yep.
This was always my least favorite part of the show because I didn't get to drink the drink, but this time
well, here you are.
I get to drink the drink.
Nice. Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's very nice. Okay. Really glad to share it with you guys. All right. So let's see what we got here. You want to go through the chat? People might still be filing in. So
Yeah. So I'll catch people up to speed real quick. So
yeah,
we talked about doing this starting like a couple months ago, something like that. And it kind of revolved around a documentary, a 4-hour basically documentary about Woodstock that we watched. How long ago now, you think?
probably like 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
like the first time.
And there was even stuff in during that first session that we noticed that was kind of strange and weird. And then it came up in conversation at some point, and you said you were down to watch it. So that's kind of, one of the core sort of things that we're going to be discussing today is this documentary. And apparently they released a director's cut a handful of years ago. I think that's what prompted us to actually watch it. Upon this second viewing, we realized that Martin Scorsese had a part to play in the production. I can't remember his exact role or title. Do you remember?
Editor and assistant director.
There you go. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of curious or whatever. And we've been holding off, only for the last like half hour or so, not talking about it so that we could just talk about it on air. But that is one of the things we're going to be discussing. And I know you're super excited because this has been like one of your things since you were a little girl, just hearing about Woodstock. Yeah. So maybe actually, if you want to get into kind of your personal relationship with some of this music, I know we've kind of been going there or whatever, but I feel like this episode in particular is like way in your wheelhouse, right?
Okay. Yeah, well, totally. And you're right. It was a huge point of interest for me as a teenager because I was super into the 1960s, super intrigued by it. Felt as though I like maybe had a past life during that time or something like that. I identified with it for better or for worse. But with Woodstock, I can always remember saying to my mom, when I would hear like the soundtrack from Woodstock or listen to artists that were at Woodstock, of like, man, I wish I could have gone and blah, blah, blah. And I was always fantasizing about it in some way. And, you know, as we've talked about, when I've like became more awake to what's going on, I can see kind of the programming in that and how it was like hook, line, sinker for me. And I sunk right into it, as many people do in, for all sorts of things. But I think the 1960s is really captivating for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And it's by design. And so it was a big paradigm shift for me when I learned that this stuff was probably not as original as we're meant to think. So it was a big like shift for me. Like I had to, realize, holy shit, what have I been listening to? Whose lyrics am I singing? What do they actually mean? Who are these people? Were they actual original artists or were they contrived? So with that, it feels really good to be coming full circle again with this stuff and actually diving a little bit deeper into it and sharing it with all of you guys. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Just real quick, some people are saying that the mics are a little low. Let me know if that's corrected or not now. So been having mic issues as of late for some reason. But I'm proud of you for coming around to all of this stuff, by the way, because I know that it was a huge paradigm shift for you.
Yeah, it's like when people find out that like 9/11's an inside job or some shit, or like all the stuff that is so paradigm shifting. I remember sitting in my apartment looking at all my records and being like, oh my God, like what? I had to really do a lot of rearranging in my own mind and deprogramming. So
yeah, these people were definitely sold as like heroes and saints to a whole generation. So
right, definitely. Since you're new here, Pedro, is there anything that you want the people to know about you, or just kind of your perspective, or I don't know, anything you want to share? That the floor is yours. If you feel like you want people to know a little bit more about what makes you tick.
That's a really broad stroke there. So I'll try to keep it simple and maybe just topical. So for me, in my late teens, early 20s, I did really get into classic rock era and did love me some Jimi Hendrix. I started playing guitar when I was 16, 17 years old. I'm still not very good at it, but I've enjoyed playing it. Had a big Jimi Hendrix poster on my wall. Was definitely a fan of a handful of the bands that were at Woodstock, The Who, Jimmy, like I said, Creedence Clearwater, some great musicians. And so it was just this iconic moment in music history that you're just always told that, how amazing it is. And in hindsight, now, I'm somebody who sees everything as being totally fake. Everything about everything is fake. And I go wax poetic about that.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here.
That's why we love you.
Yeah. And so now that I have the eyes to see differently, I watched this documentary and wow, I see things differently. And so it'll be fun to talk about because I like talking about seeing the world differently now that I see the world differently. So that's my one skill is seeing right through the BS. So plenty of BS to look through nowadays.
If you're a one-trick pony, it's a pretty good trick, I would say.
Awesome. Nice. All right. Well, cool. Do you have anything you want to say about your connection with it?
Yeah, I'll just say that I never was a fan of this kind of music, really. Mm-hmm. And I can't say I really listened to it that much ever on my own. But you've exposed me to pretty much this whole entire world, to be honest. It's like there's so many of these artists that I was vaguely familiar with over the years that never really caught my ear. And then I started hanging out with you and I started listening to it. I mean, mostly when we're like in the car together, sort of thing. So you've pulled me kind of into this world, I would say. So my interest really kind of developed after we got together, but I would say that my interest in kind of poking holes in the narrative is genuine. And when you realize clearly, I mean, obviously it's such an influential decade, but when you realize certain storylines are, for the most part bogus, it starts adding up, actually. It makes way more sense when you look at it through a skeptical sort of lens or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, yeah, this is definitely more of your thing. It's more of your wheelhouse, I would say. But I think it's fun to kind of just start decoding things and start breaking things down. And so anyway, yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the most part.
Nice. Right on. Well, cool. You want to go through the chat and then see who's say hello did we didn't do that yet, did we?
No.
No.
Okay. Well, do you want to give me the mic?
Oh yeah. Duh.
Alrighty, so who's hanging out? We've got Keeper of the Lost Histories. What's up? Nevada's here. Davin. What's going on, man? Liam is here. Hello, hello. Kabir is here. We've got the Real Spoons in the house. Mickey King, greeting from Portland, Oregon. Interesting. We're not too far away from you. What's up, Dave? Tattoo Dave Moonlander. And then we've got Lindsay in the house as well. And then Hank. Hank is here. He says, hello, Pedro. And then
Hank, what's up, buddy?
and then Debbie's here too. What's up?
What's up, Debbie?
Hi, Debbie.
And then also we have a link for people in the description, at least on my video. And then I put it in the chat. So if people want to call in at some point, they're more than welcome to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Encouraged if anybody wants to.
For sure, for sure. So, I mean, where do you guys want to start? Is there anything in particular that you guys want to get off your chest first and foremost? I mean, otherwise, I think I've got some ideas too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like starting from what we titled this episode is the Woodstock experiment. And so in my opinion, I feel like we're all lab rats right now. Every day we're experimented on in many ways, but I think the Woodstock concert, the whole thing of it was a big experiment put on by, we're not 100% sure. I'm sure there was multiple agencies involved in making this thing happen. The U.S. Army was involved. They came into the scene and they were like bringing medical support to people. Then we have these producer guys who seemingly were amateurs, but throwing these huge events, losing lots of money, hemorrhaging money. I mean, big bucks were hemorrhaged from all the things that happened at Woodstock.
Yeah, so in the documentary, the main guy was pressed on how much this whole thing cost to pull off. And he gave the figure of $2 million. And so I don't know if you...
2 million in 1969 money.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's a big number.
So today, that's $17 million. So with inflation. So $17 million. And I was talking to Michelle last night when we were watching it. We're like, okay, so the first show you ever pull off is like one of the biggest shows ever in American history. So to me, that's really suspect. And I don't know if you caught this early on or if you felt the same way, but when the journalist guy was asking him about putting on this festival, he seemed very not confident, I guess. He kind of seemed a little shy or something like that, or whatever you want, coy. And I'm like, this doesn't seem right. I'm like, a guy who's putting on this big of an event with this many people and these huge acts and stuff like that, to not kind of have the confidence to talk about it in a different sort of light, I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, he seemed to me like he was in title. He was in charge. Like they pointed, that's the hippie in charge. But clearly, he was not the guy writing the checks. He kind of did not seem that level of involved. Like he was just hanging around and being pretty casual almost about everything. Yeah,
right, exactly. And so this is classic with a lot of different hoaxy type of events or whatever. They have their fall guy or patsy or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. No, totally. And that was a big tell for me, for us, I would say. He's asking him these questions and he's just kind of even the way he answers, he's side-eyed. He doesn't look the guy in the eye. He looks annoyed that he's being asked. I mean, and who likes to talk to news reporters? Not many people. So I understand why that's annoying. But dude was just not having it almost. He didn't want to say anything. And so that to me was a big red flag right away.
Mind you, the people that are interviewing him are the paid documentary crew that were hired to document the event. So it's if he was the guy in charge, he asked them to be there, and then now he's not confident in answering their questions.
Right.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a great point. So experiment wise, one of the things that stuck out to me, and Probably, I know for you, but probably Pedro, I'm sure you noticed it. But I wanted to get right into the way that the rains came in. Okay. I know that's like jumping the gun, but I think it lends credit to this being an experiment because, I have right here in my notes there, I have a plane count. Like I counted the planes that we saw in the shots. And so there were 3 planes that I saw while musicians were performing that were flying across the sky. So it's like, okay, obviously planes fly.
Now, why would you be counting these planes, babe?
I decided to count them because when we watched the first time years ago, we remembered 2 guys that come out of the crowd. And they run up to the camera, and the guy says, "Hey! I want to know why the fascist pigs have been cloud seeding all day." And that was after the rainstorm came through. While it's raining, these kids come up to the camera and they're like, they've been spraying like all day long, and then we get all this rain come through. What's going on with that? And so to me, it's interesting that they even chose to keep that in the documentary. But to me, it's the same rhythm of hidden in plain sight sort of thing. They have to kind of show you the fuckery that's going on, but then they're going to like act like it's not happening. And I think that that's kind of an example of that.
Yeah, that's a good point because Martin Scorsese could have easily edited that bit out. It's a junk throwaway line if it means nothing, if it's otherwise it's they would have had I don't know how many hundreds of hours of B footage that one little line did not need to stay in the documentary, but it did. It was there.
Right. I thought it was kind of interesting that the 2 guys who pointed it out didn't look like stereotypical hippies either.
Right.
Okay.
They kind of almost looked like I don't know. They remind me of like what would be like the journalism students or something in school, or like something like that. I don't even know what.
Beatnik, like
beatniky sort of thing. Yeah, actually, that makes sense for sure. But they didn't seem like the stereotypical hippie.
They weren't naked.
No, they weren't naked. Yeah, that's right. And so anyway, yeah, that's a really interesting sort of little detail. And the way the clouds rolled in too, it was like a wall of clouds and wind basically that kind of rolled in, and mind you, these kids didn't have much going on in terms of shelter or whatever. So they were literally like just huddled around, under plastic tarps and, things like that. And so it wasn't a good time for them. That's for sure.
Right. And, they already were in uncomfortable situations, just seeing how they were all seated and everything. And they were just packed in there like sardines, So to think a rainstorm coming through, it's like, oh, damn it, and that's kind of how it happened. And one of the points that you made while we were watching it was at least how they lined it up in the documentary. The last performer before the rain came through was Joe Cocker, which, in my opinion, is one of the best performances of the whole thing. And his song that he sang was "A Little Help from My Friends." So he's saying like you're gonna need a little help from your friends, and is like this almost to get through the night because there's a huge rainstorm coming. And it's not to say that Joe Cocker knew or whatever, but if it was lined up that way, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I was going to ask Pedro before we got started. So what'd you think about Joe Cocker's performance?
The most impressive part to me was his air guitar moves, or like he gets really into it, and it's kind of like sloppy and a little bit I don't know, like it was like he wasn't on stage, like he was just in the shower, like playing air guitar and yelling into a mic.
Right.
And so I like that he was very raw about it, and so that's fun. It's fun to see young Joe Cocker be very raw.
Right. I mean, I was really impressed. I love it too. I'm kind of in the same boat as Michelle with it. Of just like the first time I saw it, I was kind of blown away. And I'm sure probably the first time I saw it was when we watched this documentary years ago. But the fact that he is so wild and manic, but is able to seemingly hold it together as he's singing. Like there's this really interesting sort of contrast where I kept on expecting him to like mess up or something like that, but I thought it sounded great.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like while he's singing, he's like composed, and then as soon as it's not his time to sing, he's like frantic maniac.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
So anyway, for sure, I think he was one of the best ones up there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Nice. Yeah, you guys chime in too if you're wanting to go in any direction. But okay, well, most people know the story of Woodstock. You know, it's in a small town in New York. Bethel, New York, I'm pretty sure is the name of the town. And, you know, they blocked off the road. You know, people are coming in and there's only one main road to it. So the traffic is all blocked off, which to me, it seems strategic. It's a strategic location. But one of the things I never noticed about it before, or didn't know this previously, was that it seemed to me that it was in like a valley, like where it was being held. And in the distance, in some of the shots, you could see that there's like homes, and it looks like a community of sorts. So I kind of was wondering about that, of like, is this more of a populated area than we're led to believe? Like, you're kind of led to believe that this is just in this small little podunk town that no one really goes to a lot and whatever, but there was like, you know, definitely a community in the distance, neighborhood homes. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I just think it's interesting how everything got shut down, and they literally shut down like the highway to the place. So no one's going in, no one's coming out, kind of thing. And then everybody just left their cars.
Do you have any awareness of how they spread the word? Like, was this like on radio or TV or like, you know, do you know anything about that?
No.
I do know there's like print ads, and definitely in New York City, it was all over the radio, and then famously a radio DJ, when they announced that the concert would be free, they then put that over the New York City airwaves. So you're within a few hours drive of the big city, and so you're all of a sudden telling one of the biggest cities in the world, hey, all your favorite artists are playing a few hours away, and by the way, now it's going to be free, and we're going to feed you, and all the drugs are free too, come on over. Yeah, it's going to turn into a big scene real quick, and it did.
Yeah, definitely. And the theme continues too, of like a lot of very young people, very young, you know, which is all the hippie stuff that we've been talking about too. You know, you're talking probably age range from like 14, 15 upward, but I think it resides, like we were talking about, maybe the average age could have been like 20 or something like that, if you were to average it out of these people. And at one point in the doc, there's like, they have payphones that they bring in, and they are interviewing these kids in line, and every single one of them is calling their parents, which I thought was really funny. And it does show how young they are, and also probably that a lot of them still lived at home, which nothing wrong with that, you know, but it just, it's showing how young they all are. And which is just another theme for me to show that this experiment, this generation, this whole decade was really targeted the young people in such a weird way. And I couldn't help but think, like, where are some of these people? Whatever happened to some of these people? How many of them are still alive? You know what I mean? All those kinds of questions, like kind of existentially speaking, like, oh my God, did they burn out? Did they... You know, some of them for sure. Right. Did they wise up and move on? You know, did they stay in the hippie dream and never leave? You know, probably all of the above, really.
Yeah, I would say so. Regarding the hemorrhaging money thing, in the documentary, he's being interviewed, right? And he is asked about the money being lost. And he basically kind of brushed it off and said something along the lines, I'm totally paraphrasing, but basically it's like, well, you know, they're going to take a huge hit on this one because the tickets became free and all the other logistical stuff that's required to pull this off. But look at what we did, though. Like we brought everyone here together, and there was definitely this theme throughout the documentary that this was like a major accomplishment. You know, and they made it seem like it was like this could be like a model for the future or something like that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You know, it was more of like this utopian sort of thing, or that we kind of created paradise, if only for a weekend or whatever.
One thing I noticed watching the documentary is I'm always trying to look at it through the lens of okay, forget that you're watching a documentary or a movie or whatever. It's easy to get lost in the story. I try to like look at things from the perspective of the film crew and like what it takes to like organize a thing and how it's edited. Like, what's the story they're telling you with the documentary, and what are the recurring themes? And so a couple of the things that kept sticking out to me was they kept talking about how young the kids were, and they kept talking about they would interview older folks from like the town or whatever, and they always had to make the point of how nice the kids were, how
We
friendly
noticed
the
that
kids
too.
were, how they're always saying please and thank you, and it was almost like made a point. And when I would see these adults also making these points, it looked to me very clearly that they were just reading off a script, like they were just told to like, hey, say these nice thing about these hippie kids, that they're all nice and they're all good. Like clearly they were just trying to define what a hippie was via this documentary, or at least partially define what it was, change and write what the culture's expectations are going forward, is what it seemed like to me. Like
Interesting.
They already had a preconceived notion of how they wanted to sell the population that was going to show up at Woodstock, and then they just edited accordingly.
Right. We did notice the sort of pleasant way that they were framing everybody. Like, oh, these are just such nice kids, and they're all very polite, or whatever they were saying about them. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, it had not occurred to me that this is like something that they're being fed to say. I kind of chalked it up more of like, well, the first thing I think I brought up to Michelle was like, those same comments would not happen today. I could see maybe back then they still did have manners or whatever,
Yeah.
But today it's like you put on a show that big, it's just like it would be a very, very different sort of thing,
Woodstock 99 comes to
Exactly.
mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, totally. So I kind of chalked it up. I guess maybe this could be me being naive of being like, oh man, you know what? Maybe they all were nice people, and that they all got along, and that this was something that they, I don't know. They respected enough, the town or whatever, just to be pleasant, I suppose. But I could see, obviously, if there were any comments that were negative, just not include them in the documentary.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that easy.
Right. Definitely. And so that is a big part of this whole entire thing too, right? Is like the Age of Aquarius sort of hippie thing. I keep on going back to the word utopia, and so they're like swimming in the river or the lake or whatever, and no one has money, and but yet everyone's being fed. And so there was an overly optimistic theme about everything. And even when the military or the helicopters were like dropping food, or they said that they had set up kitchens for people, they were like, I think it was Wavy Gravy, who you have a lot of information about, seems like. He was saying, oh, we're all going to be fed here. It's not going to be steak and eggs. It's not going to be steak and eggs breakfast, but everyone's going to be fed. And isn't that amazing? Isn't this incredible? Look at what we're doing here. This is like, whatever, this, whatever, very nice, optimistic sort of thing. And then you look at what they're actually being fed, and it's like rice.
Granola.
Yeah, or something like that. It's like some sort of grain or oat or whatever.
Granola made in a garbage can. Like mixed up.
And so to me, I'm like, wow, they're really having to keep up this thing. And I'm like, I know for a fact there's people here who are not having a good time. Oh. But everything that was on the mic that was being said kind of had this sort of like veneer of positivity, I would say.
There was one bit about there was a hot dog stand, and they were running out of hot dogs, so they upped the price like fourfold. They started off at $0.25, and then they ended up at $1. And when they finally got to $1, it pissed enough people off that they burned the trailer down.
Oh yeah.
And so that's like a negative, right? Like they were the peace living hippies that burnt down the hot dog guy's stand. But that bit kind of gets like omitted because, again, editing, right? You don't have to highlight that bit. You can just ignore the fact that some violence did go down.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things I thought about too with violence and, dare I say rape, all these sorts of things that go on at these festivals. I would assume that there were assaults and things like that never got talked about, and I'm just speculating because of how many people were there. And, that's one of the things you hear about at these festivals a lot, whatever festival it is. But specifically like some more of the mainstream ones I've heard, you hear stories about that. people coming forward later or whatever, and then knowing how many drugs were there and what happens when people black out or whatever. And that's something I did think about while watching it. It's more of like the darker side, I guess, of what I thought of. But kind of going back to the Wavy Gravy thing, because he is an interesting character. And Wavy Gravy ran what's known as the Hog Farm. And the Hog Farm is still one of the biggest, it is the longest running commune in the United States. It still exists. It exists. They have like a headquarters in Berkeley, and then they have an actual farm, multiple acre farm in Laytonville, California. I'm pretty sure it is. They didn't originally start out in Laytonville, though. They were in another city, Sunny something, California, it's called. That was their original place, but then they moved, to a bigger farm. And they throw festivals there still. They have music. They have bands that they actually like represent or support. So if you go to the Hog Farm website, you'll be able to see all of this stuff. They have it's a lot of jam bands, so they're kind of staying with that motif, Grateful Dead, Fish, sort of, whatever. But they throw parties there. Wavy Gravy actively, as like a 87-year-old man, dresses up as a clown and has children camps and all these weird things. And but the story of Wavy Gravy goes along with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters from back in the early 60s. He was among Ken Kesey and was one of the people that was going to, I believe it was Berkeley, for these LSD experiment. They were basically lab rats for the early LSD testing that they were doing at the universities. And Wavy Gravy was among one of the guys that was with Ken Kesey doing that. And Ken Kesey and Wavy Gravy put on one of the first acid tests in San Francisco. And that's when we've talked about those before, but when they would have just a bunch of people come and they would have a venue and everybody would get dosed with acid in fruit punch, and or Kool-Aid, the electric Kool-Aid tests, all of that stuff. Wavy Gravy was very much heavily involved in that. And so he had started the Hog Farm. And now the Hog Farm was just a bunch of people living at this commune, and Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm were the security at Woodstock. So they were asked to be the security, and they were literally flown in on an airplane, on a jet. And I just learned this, but Wavy Gravy was talking about how, like, I got contacted and they asked me, can you do security at this event? And he doesn't say who contacts them. He just says, we got contacted. And I said, well, we're going to actually be in New Mexico doing an event. And they said, oh, well, that's fine. We'll just get you guys all on a plane and we'll fly you in. They literally got flown in on, like, basically a private jet, but like a full-size plane. And he talks about how the stewardess literally put herself in one of the some room. She locked herself in one of the cabinet rooms of the airplane, and we just took over that plane and we flew into Woodstock and we were there and this and that. And so with Wavy Gravy, I get really not good vibes from him, especially in the documentary itself. He kind of has a creepy vibe to me. And my speculation, this is just a speculation, but I have a feeling that he was very much involved in trafficking of drugs, of people. And I think that he had a big role to play with that, because I think he's a connected man in a lot of ways. And with these big events, too, which kind of goes along with this, like if you were talking about like the Olympics or the Super Bowl or whatever, most people who look into these events on the alternative side realize that they're used for trafficking, whether that be drugs or people or children or weapons or whatever they want to traffic. It's a really good opportunity to do it when you have events like this, because they can be covers for a lot of things, and you have a lot of people. A lot of people get lost in the shuffle. You can grab people, you can this, you can that, you can coax people, you can drug people, whatever. And by this time in the 60s, speed was a big thing. This is when, Haight-Ashbury was kind of starting to crumble because harder drugs were being introduced. Speed was kind of around for a while, but it was just like the harder drugs were hitting this scene, this group of people. And I think Hog Farm and Wavy Gravy had something to do with it. Even in the documentary of Woodstock, he just looks like he's kind of a druggy, weird guy.
Do you know the guy that Michelle's referring to? The guy, he's wearing like a jumpsuit thing?
Yeah, he shows up in a jumpsuit. I didn't know that they were from California, which makes it just all the more suspicious because it's like, what? You're in New York and you're the only people you can find to do security. You have to fly them in.
Of course.
From California. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And it also sounds like they were like, actually, we're busy. But then they're like, no, you're not allowed to say no. We're flying you in. And you're going to be here.
Well, yeah, this is all really interesting because we know, too, and we've talked about it, but the Altamont concert festival, security was the Hells Angels. And so it's just like, if you choose the right security, then they know who to let in, who, if it's for trafficking purposes, who to let out. That one other thing with this, it's like, how many girls, or boys for that matter, I guess, but how many young people went to Woodstock and never came home? There had to have been, it'd be easy to cover up dozens and dozens of missing people that way too.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So anyway, it's just like when so many people kind of collide in one place, it's just like those things are going to happen.
Yeah.
I feel like, especially here in the States, well, probably everywhere, but you know what I mean? It's just like, that's just like part and parcel for the whole thing.
In terms of these big events being trafficking situations, to put it into time context, like these big concerts were relatively new concept. Like this is one of the first premier big outdoor festivals, and so you didn't necessarily have giant bands going around touring the world. You started to get like your Beatles and your Stones going, and you had your Elvis Presley, but these were all kind of new ideas, these giant acts that could go around and fill stadiums. And so this is sort of like a new idea, like they're filling out and writing the blueprint for like how to start running these kinds of events going forward. Because this is kind of coming at a time where you could make things sort of mainstream and accessible to everybody. Like electronics, suddenly everybody can have a record player at home and you could buy these albums. Whereas, before it wasn't a luxury. You had a radio if your family was rich, but televisions and all these and media in general, home electronics were not normal until like the 50s, 60s, and so now that stuff's normalized, and they're spoon feeding you your big heroes.
Yeah,
and we're kind of told that they come up naturally because they're so gifted, but the reality is we're spoon fed all these characters and we swallowed it hook, line, and sinker.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. No, those are all really good points. As an example, right, it's like Burning Man, was birthed out of stuff like this, was created out of this kind of model or whatever, which is really interesting too, that the last Burning Man, they got rained out for a bit and it caused, all sorts of issues for them. And so I haven't even looked into it, but was it a strategic rain out? Was it another cloud seeding sort of thing or whatever? And Burning Man 2 really is like a nice parallel because of how it's pretty much this is all just New Age culture, So it's just like the New Age sort of psyop or campaign or whatever you want to say. It's like that's what it looks like these days, Also, to your point too, it's so new that a festival these days with that many people would have multiple stages. And so that's one of the things I thought about. I'm like, all of these people around one stage,
right.
To me, that's like really wild to think about. I know that's happened before. I've seen footage of like, I think it was like Metallica in the Soviet Union or something. And it's like freaking insane. It's like one of the biggest concerts ever in history. And they're all just watching Metallica. And I'm like, I can't even imagine being that far away behind a sea of people. And everyone's just listening to the exact same person sing or play guitar or whatever, So a lot of newer shows like this, they break it up. And so you're like, okay, cool. If you like this kind of music, you go over here. If you want to listen to this guy, you go over there, whatever. But everyone just crowded around, one area. To me is just kind of interesting to think about.
They crowded around and it was all day and all night. That was like one thing that stood out to me on the rewatch was the timing of things. And one thing I didn't realize before is they'd be like, oh, well, The Who, they headlined Saturday night. Well, that meant they played Sunday morning at like 5 a.m. and everybody had to stay up all freaking night. And then finally you made it to 5 a.m. and your band gets to play. And it's like, who is going to be in their right mind at 5 a.m. after having just partied 2 days straight to like enjoy your band play? And how are you supposed to get the best performance out of these bands when they're playing at these absurd hours? But a lot of these artists were playing in the god awful hours of the wee morning.
Really? Yeah, I don't think I knew that detail, to be honest, because they didn't make that known in the documentary. Probably, I don't think.
No, but I have heard. I've heard that from doing other research, like throughout the years, that it was kind of like you were just kind of thrown on when it worked out. That's the whole story with Santana too. Like they were all on acid when they did their performance because they thought that they were going to be performing later. And so I know that there was like a lot of fluctuation with scheduling and all that stuff.
Right. I mean, yeah, I just think being an audience member there and being forced to have a good time or watch this person, do whatever they're going to do, it seems kind of like torture, to be honest. At my older age, it seems like torture. That's one of the vibes I got.
Yeah, and the other thing too, the one stage idea. A lot of times too at these modern or current festivals that would be that big, they at least have monitors or screens where you could see. You can maybe have a better chance of seeing the artist. But when they'd have shots in the documentary from the stage looking out, it's just like, holy shit. I mean, there is a shit ton of people there, and it's actually kind of impressive when you think about it that they were able to actually even pull it off the way they did.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things I wanted to mention is the fact that I think that there's something to be said symbolically about Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. And even we saw the poster today for Woodstock.
Yeah.
And what did it say? An Aquarian exposition?
Something like that.
And that was its like original title. It was just an Aquarian exposition.
Not Woodstock?
And it's supposed to be like an art festival. There were other things highlighted besides the music, and then that's all that's talked about is the music. But it was supposed to be like a full-on arts festival with like arts and crafts and
arts and music.
This Aquarian exposition.
Yeah, so the Aquarian exposition, and I brought it up a week or two ago, but the biggest routine gathering in the world is called the Kumbh Mela in India, and Kumbh means pot, Kumbh Mela means celebration of the pot. Kumbh is what they call Aquarius. And so I just think it's really interesting that the biggest gathering in the world is literally like an Aquarian themed sort of thing over there, though. And then over here, they linked it with Aquarius as well. And so I think just the Aquarian energy is very much community oriented, sort of like humanitarian oriented. So that's the vibe that I always get from it. And so kind of good marketing, I guess, or whatever you want to say, or good programming.
I know. I mean, what better way to get a bunch of people to group up and huddle up and to dump a bunch of rain on top of their heads?
Dude, yes, good point. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
The water bearer.
The water bearer, yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Covering up all of a sudden. Everybody was shoulder to shoulder, hiding under whatever scrap of garbage they could find.
Dude, that's fascinating. Because also, too, the other thing that Michelle noticed, so the main hook or the main draw for the Kumbh Mela is to take a ritual bath in one of their rivers because they believe that the nectar of immortality, at least one drop, was dropped in that river location. And so that's why they commune around these certain areas. And so they take a ritual bath, and then you see people swimming in the river and everything else. And obviously people got naked and stuff like that. And Aquarius aligns with the star card, which is a nude woman preparing a kind of like a natural ritual bath, basically. So there's definitely parallels there. The other thing I'll say, so in my opinion, when you look at the major arcana and the cards that are heavily associated with the sign, you're pretty much seeing an expression of that sign. So when you look at the star card, you're looking at an expression of Aquarius. And it's been a common sort of theme for a very long time to always have a tree in the background with one bird on top. And then the Woodstock logo is a hand on a guitar, and then there's a bird right on top of the guitar, sort of thing. So an air symbol, and then Aquarius is an air sign and stuff like that. So it's a very subtle sort of thing, but it lines up very nicely, I think, with the Aquarian sort of motif or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's that. An Aquarian exposition. I hadn't realized that till today.
Well, and one of the other things I noticed and they were dropping clothes, dry clothes and flowers. Mm-hmm. It's like, the flowers, okay, weird, But clothes, oh, sorry.
No, I noticed that bit too, and now my first thought was like, well, how did anybody ever have the foresight to be like, oh, these hippies are going to need a bunch of dry clothes. Let's put together hundreds of outfits and get them ready for a plane flight. Like, it was just all of a sudden, here's clothes raining from the sky. Bizarre.
Yeah, super bizarre. And the flowers, then you have just bouquets of flowers that you're going to, throw out to them because hippies like flowers. But one of the things I noticed was Country Joe and the Fish comes on the stage to perform, and he's wearing a Woodstock shirt. And it's branded on the back, and it's the Woodstock logo we were just talking about. And I wondered if what they were throwing from the planes was Woodstock branded clothing, just to further push the point of getting this logo out there, getting this imprinted in people's minds or something like that. Like, wouldn't that be something? Because how are they going to match up? Are they really putting together outfits, or was it like they had a bunch of shirts made already that they either were going to sell or they were going to whatever, and then they just decide to throw those out of the plane, or that was the plan the whole time? Who knows? But that was a thought that I had.
It's like nowadays we have this throwaway culture where all our clothes are made in China or whatever, and so it's like, yeah, I get you could go to a Goodwill and there's literally a ton of throwaway clothing. But back then they had like quality clothes that were like made to last, and you bought your outfits that you had, and you didn't have like necessarily a used market for throwaway clothes. Like, those were made of quality.
Totally true, dude. One of the things I was kind of like being nostalgic about while watching it was like, man, that's when denim was denim. It's just like you look at the jeans and you look at like the fabrics that people were wearing, and you could tell it was quality clothes, just like exactly what you're saying. I just want to bring up the parallel between them dropping flowers, and then it's like, where are they getting all these flowers, and why they're going to go out of their, people are like, hungry and all that stuff.
And it's literally declared a disaster area.
Yeah, that's true, exactly.
So it's like nothing practical. Like,
no emergency food rations.
Yeah, what the hell?
So here at Woodstock, they're dropping clothes and flowers. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, they're dropping like propaganda pamphlets and who knows what else. Dropping stuff from helicopters is like a military tactic.
Right.
So it's just kind of just interesting, the contrast between those two things, I guess.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, actually. I wanted to jump into this. One of the main producers behind the festival. So the guy we were talking about in the beginning, curly-haired hippie who's all coy. His name is Michael Lang. Now, I know from my interest in this festival when I was young that there were three main people that were involved with it. Michael Lang was kind of like he was the talking head of it. He was the guy that was out in front with everything. But there were two other people that, and if I remember correctly, I think he either went to college with them or something like that. But they were more of the backers. So they were more financial business support. And then Michael Lang was at the forefront. But looking into Michael Lang specifically, he was the producer for all the Woodstocks. So even Woodstock 94, Woodstock 99, and then there were whispers of them trying to put a Woodstock 2019 together, and I don't think it ever happened. But I'm pretty sure he was dead by then, or he died soon before or after that. After the whisperings of having another Woodstock. But he became Joe Cocker's producer after his performance at Woodstock. So this guy was probably a talent scout in his own right, or he already had producing experience, or he had been in that line of work and they threw him out there like he was this newbie that didn't know what he was doing. But really, I think he probably knew the whole time what he was doing.
Well, clearly he had an eye for good talent because he was picking great bands like Santana and Jimi Hendrix. And then if he was really doing even the 90s Woodstocks, I mean, he probably handpicked Limp Bizkit himself. So impressive.
Dude, totally. Well, that's one of the other things I found out about him is that he actually worked with a bunch of really famous artists. So I'll just rattle them off. These are the ones
I say that. I want to say I heard this, and I don't know if it's true, but I think he like allegedly even like lived with Bob Dylan. Like he was rubbing elbows and like living with some of these names and and faces. So he was a connected guy for sure.
I could see it. And he also had his own organization. It was called the Michael Lang Organization. So he had like a production company basically, but he also owned a record label, a small one. It was called Just Sunshine Records. But some of the people that he worked with over the years were Outkast, Prince, Snoop Dogg, Steely Dan, the Fugees, Madonna, Dave Matthews, Bruce Springsteen, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Linkin Park, and there was more in that list. I think Avril Lavigne was on the list. Wow. I didn't write that down, but when I read that, I was like, oh shit, that's like kind of a big deal. Like, those are all really big names. So even if he was new to the game in '69 for Woodstock, he definitely knew what he was doing to a certain extent and was kind of like the he was the face for all this. So for him to sit there and go, I don't know, it was just like this and it was just like that and see you later, I'm getting on my motorcycle and going out of here. It's like, no. You know way more. And you just don't want to say it or you're told not to say it.
One thing that stuck out about Michael Lang to me is there's this one bit I saw where he was smart enough to say that he didn't drink anything unless he opened the bottle himself because he knew everything was laced with drugs. And so it's like, this is your own show, and you can't even drink the provided beverages for your crew.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. So Just Sunshine Records. That kind of. I mean, that's like a perfect name. It's so new agey.
It's so new agey and like so new agey and as if it's just sunshine. Give me a break.
Right.
Well, it's just sunshine. You have to have the dark too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So just kind of speaking to the overall mentality with everything.
Yeah.
And then they, one of the things is them feeling as though they really accomplished something big. Like there was this sense of like, I don't know, like they had just like moved a mountain by having all these people together. And these kids are like, see, I mean, we're all getting along. It's like, we can all just get along. And it's like, there's like, for the most part, it's just like 99% young white people who are basically on a 3 or 4 day vacation or whatever, and they're listening to this music or whatever. There's nothing to complain about. You know what I mean? There's no. It's like, of course, it's like everyone's getting along, I think, or I just don't. They were just really hyping up just the fact that like they felt like by them all getting together, like this could be kind of like the blueprint for humanity going forward or whatever.
Yeah, if we could all just trample dairy farms and sing Kumbaya for 3 days,
we'll
solve all the world's problems.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's the classic sort of liberal mentality in general, in a lot of ways, I would say. It, actually, you know what it kind of reminded me of a little bit? Did you ever go to Occupy when they were around?
I lived downtown at that time, so I did not go there. They came to me many a time and marched out my window. So I was a few blocks from that. I forget what their little camp was called.
Yeah.
But anyways.
So I used to go down there, and I was just curious, and I would bring my camera, and I was just taking photos and stuff like that. But they liked having dance parties, so they would have a little dance party and whatever. And I'm pretty sure this is like not unique to the Portland Occupy, but they would have these dance parties and I would just be like tripping out watching these guys dance, and it's like there's clearly drug use. It was kind of like a free-for-all for a little while. People can kind of do whatever they wanted in a lot of ways. And so just thinking that you can dance your way to freedom or liberty or something along those lines, It's kind of that same sort of mentality, I would say.
Yeah, excluding the hard work that it takes to actually make changes and things like that is very classic to this mentality.
Yeah, for sure.
But, I'm looking at my notes and now I'm being reminded of all the stuff that I did notice. And so, Woodstock becomes a free concert at one point because people are just they're walking over the fence. And I remember thinking to myself, like, the fence that they had set up, it was almost like they were asking for people to trample it.
It was a joke.
It was a joke. It was like,
fence.
it was maybe like a 6-foot fence, if that, probably not even that. It was maybe like a 5-foot fence.
It doesn't even matter. It was so flimsy.
It was so flimsy.
Yeah. The fence you guys have made of sticks in your yard here is a better fence than what they had going on.
Dude, that's so funny. That's true, because I'm like, oh God, I mean, duh, they would break this down and step over it. It's like it was being asked that they do that. And one of the things that you mentioned, Mario, when the rains came through and then they start having the footage of, okay, we're sliding in the mud and we're doing this and doing that. There was like this primal sense that came out of people. And so we were talking about how was that part of the agenda of that? Did they want to see how far they could push people? What will people do when it gets to this point? And I think because we all are from tribes, like deep down, our ancestors are tribes, men and women, and it's all in all of our blood, no matter what your lineage is. So it was kind of interesting to see that that's what they did revert to. So even just the chanting, like they were like drumming and it was just like chanting, and they're like covering themselves in mud. This is a very primal practice as well. Our ancestors probably used mud as camouflage if they went into battle, depending on the, where they're at and stuff like this. So it was kind of interesting to kind of see that side come out of people. And couldn't help but think, what do the organizers of this think about seeing that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like it could have been part of the whole agenda to get people to that point or whatever. And so, but yeah, tribalism and what I have been kind of thinking in my mind, it reminds me of Terrence McKenna had this idea called the archaic revival. And so that's one of the things that he wanted to kind of like initiate or be a catalyst for, whatever you want to say. And he thought that drugs were a way to bring people back to like an earlier sort of time, a way to commune with Earth, pretty much, right? And so that's partly a lot of these kids, their hearts are in the right place.
Oh yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just like they want, to live a certain kind of way, and they think people should be treated a certain kind of way. And so I think that there's always this yearning for this archaic revival, just to borrow that phrase, I guess, a way back to nature, communing with nature and getting back to your roots and things like that. The thing is that the system will put that out there as like, that's what you're doing. Burning Man's kind of like this too, I think, in a lot of ways. Dress like you are like in a Mad Max movie or something like that, or dress like, or come to this event for however many days. And, don't be behind a computer, and you don't have to be at the office, and, all this stuff, like leave your technology behind for a weekend and get back to, that primal sort of center or whatever. And so to me, that's like a very hippie bohemian sort of concept, is this return back to some of that. So I think that I think it was induced that they wanted that to happen, in a lot of ways. And it worked. And so, I don't know. It was interesting. They were banging like cans together and, all that kind of stuff. And, I mean, this is kind of like the mob mentality too, or the herd mentality as well. It's kind of interesting to see, a few people in the front of the crowd stand up, and then everybody starts standing up or whatever. Or it's like, it only takes a few people to start doing this, that, or the other thing, and then everyone else kind of follows along. So that must have been something that they were keeping an eye on the whole entire time.
Yeah. Well, and that makes me think of something else I wrote down, was that basically there was a lot of commands being shouted at these people that were there, whether it was, I wrote down, Richie Havens, which was another one that one of his performance of his song Freedom is one of my favorite Woodstock performances. But his whole thing is clap your hands, and everyone starts clapping their hands. But there's multiple instances of this, and so they were telling people to do a lot of things, like when the bad acid is going around, it's the brown acid, don't take the brown acid, but if you take it, only take a half a tab, just take a half, so they're just continuously telling people what to do, and they're doing it. And no doubt, there's going to be that kind of organization, I guess, or attempt at an organization in a festival like this. But it's kind of interesting how much of that was going
again
on.
real quick, why don't you edit that little line out of the announcer in the background, telling people not to take it, whatever.
What?
Like, it's so easy to edit it out. It has nothing to do with the music, but no, it stays in. That detail stays in.
So what's your bigger picture, I guess, idea of keeping it in, and how that helps their cause or whatever?
It goes, you could argue all day what was the cause. And so if they're trying to define a movement or a culture, part of that culture is going to be this drug use. And you want it. So another thing about this documentary is, okay, so this was a big deal concert, but this documentary was made side by side with this concert. And so after this concert goes down, well, this is an Academy Award winning documentary as well that I think gets released to theaters, if I'm not mistaken, after the fact. So if you weren't lucky enough to get to go in person, you got to see the theatrical release or rent it at home, or maybe they didn't have rental back then, right? So you had to see it in the theater. And so you were made to digest this if you were at all a young person relating to that culture whatsoever. It was part of your pilgrimage to be a hippie. Watch this Woodstock documentary. And so you're getting these ideas of it's all young, beautiful people running around naked, and you can do all the drugs you want and everything's just fine. It's no big deal.
Yeah, really well put, I would say. Pilgrimage is a very interesting word here, because you're 100% right. And even Burning Man is almost more of a deliberate pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's year after year, and then they literally have the burning effigy ritual, right? And then literally how Burning Man is designed and stuff like that, the playa or whatever. What was I going to say? So I think kind of what you're saying, which I totally agree with you. As we've learned so many times, it's not about the actual event. It's the memory of the event.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah. So, okay, you're a 16-year-old kid, and your parents are like, that's the devil's music. Don't listen to that. And drugs are bad. Don't smoke pot and whatever. And then so you go and watch this movie, though, with your friends, and they're talking the whole film about how there's endless acid and everybody, a haze of marijuana smoke, and everybody's smoking hash, and but everybody's so peace and love, and nothing bad happened. So here your parents are constantly telling you these are all bad things you should avoid, and then the media turns around and says, no, actually these are all really good things, and look, only peace and love comes from doing these things. So you should feel free to partake. Your parents are wrong, we're right, follow us, not them.
Right. Totally. The pilgrimage thing, dude, that is totally one of the key things here. That's exactly what they were tapping into. They made it. I actually thought that there was a really interesting kid who was interviewed. He had blonde hair. He was with his girlfriend, or they're kind of dating or whatever. And he was very insightful. And he said something along the lines of, a lot of people are coming here and they're all searching for something. But we're all searching for something. And so we're all coming here looking for the same thing, and they think they're going to find it here, but they're not going to. It's almost like this etheric sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was a really interesting sort of insight. And that's kind of what pilgrimages are, is you think that you're going back to some sort of, you think you're going back, or you think that you're going to access, in a way, I always refer to it as the sacred center. Whatever that might mean to you, whether it's within, whether it's, external or whatever, there's all sorts of different ideas of this sacred center sort of thing. So when people go to Mecca, that's a pilgrimage, right? So they think that this is going to get them closer to God. When people go to Jerusalem, same thing. It's going to get them closer to God. And to me, the closest thing to God is this sacred center concept, which is a fractal sort of concept. So it's everywhere too. It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time sort of thing. But they definitely sold this idea to all these kids that this is the new age sort of pilgrimage, centered around these musicians and everything else. And even the same kid too, I thought it was really interesting. He said something along the lines of he's I think music is something good or it's important, but I never thought that it should be like the focus of like everything. So he even was kind of like questioning just the focus on the musical acts as well, of being like, okay, cool, we're all communing together. Everyone here is kind of searching for something, but is it really Jimi Hendrix's solo that we're searching for? Right. You know what I mean? Is it all of these like cover songs, from a previous era? Is this what really people are searching for? Right. Sort of thing. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about.
That's a great point. I like where we're going with this, because to think you had that many people all together and they're all just focused on one thing. That's not to say that there weren't people mingling and going off and doing other things, but isn't that kind of strange that that's what they were kind of promoting? Look at all of us, we're beautiful, you're creating your own community and all of this stuff, but it was really just mostly about the music, which is interesting.
And then the music is, it is what it is, but like, well, who are these bands? Who are the record labels behind these bands?
Yep.
This documentary, for example, is being put out by Warner Brothers, and they're the ones who own the soundtrack. And so it's like, well, is
All right, we lost you guys for a second. Sorry, our slow internet. You were right in the middle of a great thought. Warner Brothers being in charge of the documentary.
So Warner Brothers, they own the rights to the soundtrack and the documentary, and so then it just makes you think, well what of these bands were just the bands under Warner Brothers contracts, and that's who ends up being the primary lineup for I'm not saying that was the case, I really don't know, but it's just like the details you aren't told that might actually mean more than we realize. Somebody had to back this very expensive endeavor.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like people literally from all over the world, art like the Who, coming to the U.S. for this thing. So, no, I totally agree with that. That's why I would love actually to know a little bit more about the pre-production side of Woodstock. And there's even a documentary called Creating Woodstock, which obviously it's like, how accurate of information are you going to get or whatever with that. But I do think that's might be worth looking into at some point. So we'll probably watch that, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds like there's something you want to talk about?
Yeah. Well, I just I found something in my notes that is worth maybe saying. It goes more along with the new age programming kind of stuff. But at one point in the doc, they have a guy who's talking about Kundalini yoga. Do you remember this part?
Yeah.
And they have like a group of people and they're doing all the breathing exercises where you're mimicking like hyperventilating.
Yes.
Which
not mimicking, you're hyperventilating.
You basically are hyperventilating. And anyone who looks into certain cults will see that a lot of times these sorts of exercises are practiced by cults to induce some sort of out-of-body, out-of-body experience, or just to make somebody kind of like, not delusional, but it puts you in a different mindset.
Mental state, right?
Yes.
Somewhere.
You're like vulnerable in some way. I wonder what it opens up in you. And if you're working with the Kundalini energy, from what I know with this is like, I don't think it should be just a willy-nilly kind of thing that you just try and experiment with. I mean, I guess you can, but I've heard stories of people doing it and they're not like quite centered or whatever. And it actually just like causes more havoc than good when these things happen,
Right. Well, one of the things that guy kept on talking about was he almost looked at it like a way to hack your body to get free drugs, pretty much. I don't know if you remember that, but that's what he kept on saying. He's like, and then you'll get high and you don't even need to get drugs or whatever. So it seemed like that was kind of his end goal.
Just to be fucked up.
Yeah, just to be fucked up. And then along with that, it reminds me the fact that they had a guru there, right? And so they had this Indian guru guy there. And I don't know his name. I don't know how popular he is or was or whatever. But I'm like, that is that was that era though, where like more Eastern sort of philosophy and stuff really, it just became revitalized, because I think it kind of just goes through waves or whatever. But yoga and Eastern sort of ideas like that, I mean, it's just like it's so fused into the New Age. It's just like they're kind of inseparable, in a lot of ways. So when they rolled him out, I was actually waiting for him, and I was thinking, I'm like, oh, sometimes these guys are very, very insightful, but he really didn't have much. And it could be a language thing or whatever, but then why did they roll him out of all people?
Yeah.
He just said something along the lines of like the United States. The role moving forward should be that the United States should help the world spiritually or something. It was very, very vague sort of thing. It wasn't like anything too specific. But that, like I said, that's part of the New Age blueprint. They really idolize these types of people, So I'm sure he got many new followers that weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Would be my guess. One of the interesting things is, there's two people I'm thinking of in particular. There might be more that maybe became other people in the limelight later on in life, and then someone else that is worth transvestigating, I think, a little bit. And the first one is Jimi Hendrix, and how some people think that Jimi Hendrix looks a lot like Morgan Freeman. And when you compare the two, to me, it's like a dead ringer sort of thing. So, do you have any thoughts about this, either of you?
I've thought about this quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Jimmy, to me, is a pretty good dead ringer for what became Morgan Freeman, and I think his story is interesting. It's just another vague story, but one thing, watching this documentary, even being a fan, now I'll preface this by saying Jimi Hendrix is a great guitar player, but what I realized is his sort of prowess to be like one of the world's greatest is just it was sold to us. So in reality, he's actually a very mediocre guitar player who seems like he's constantly trying too hard and isn't quite confident in his playing. He's not a master of the guitar by any means. Like he's fumbling around and like experimenting and trying things, which is all well and good. Like you can have jam bands and they can experiment and just try new things, and but he's clearly not this like virtuoso that he can't like make a mistake. He's actually not that great. And then he was pushed extremely heavy, though. I mean, even his band was simply called the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So he like meant to just like ogle at this guy's playing, but really his drum and bass was where it was at, and they kept him together. Like they just kept the beat going and just let him noodle to his heart's content, and made sure he didn't get too far off the rails. And so I think it was very telling to see him fumble through some of his solos or just play very haphazardly. And then I even had to make sure, I was like, wow, am I just remembering things wrong? Maybe it's just an off day for him. I'm going to look up some other footage of him playing live, and I was laughing out loud. I was kind of shocked that he's not that good. He's very mediocre.
Lots of but he, like I said earlier, his swagger sort of, or his outfit, and as a personality, as a character, essentially, right? He was appealing to people.
He has an appeal. He has some swagger. He definitely had a look about him. And then also, I'm always having to peel back a layer and saying, well, what's going on here? Because, like I said, they're starting to get record turntables in your house. You can start buying records. Things are starting to get mass produced, and you go to a store and buy them where you couldn't before. And another one of these things is like an electric guitar. You couldn't just go buy an instrument. That was like a finely handcrafted thing that was expensive. But finally, around that era, you could go to Sears and you could buy like a Chinese-made, mass-produced guitar, and that was like a relatively new thing. So he was never like officially endorsed by like Fender, but he's always going to be coupled with the idea of a Fender Stratocaster. So the amount of Fender Stratocasters that Jimi Hendrix is responsible for selling is like got to be in the millions.
Oh yeah.
So it's like that guy's the amount of guitar pedals and guitars that have been sold because of Jimi Hendrix's influence. It's almost like, without saying it, he's just a sponsored guy put out there because he's actually promoting this idea of selling records, buying guitars, buying guitar equipment, and they built multi-billion-dollar industries around these characters that got sold to us as heroes. And I think it's not easy to realize that Jimi Hendrix is responsible for selling a lot of guitars third hand, right?
Right, totally. We'll get back to Morgan Freeman, Jimi Hendrix, but just from a guitar perspective, what did you think of Carlos Santana and his guitar skills?
Well, that's a good example because I think Carlos was, despite being definitely more intoxicated, clearly, was playing better than Jimi Hendrix was playing at the same show. In fact, I saw multiple guitar players. I was like, wow, this is actually better than what Jimmy was doing. And they weren't touted as being these name brand guitar guys. Especially Santana. Like, Santana's a curious case because on one hand, why were they even at the show? Because they hadn't really put out an album, or they were an unknown band.
Exactly.
Right.
But here they were put front and center, and they have this electrifying show. So it's like somebody knew that these guys were going to be a big deal, and so it was almost like they were made guys already.
Yeah.
So they got their name, and they got to play, and wow, their performance actually is probably my favorite.
Oh yeah, it's right up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I can never get out of my head is one, how young they look, but the drummer is like
The drummer,
he's like
dude.
a 13-year-old kid out of his mind. I don't know what's going on, but he does not miss a beat.
No.
He's just insanely wailing on the drums, and
Yeah.
it sounds great.
Yeah,
Whereas
totally.
Jimi Hendrix insanely wails on his guitar, and it sounds very haphazard. Like that kid was a way better musician than Jimmy was.
Totally.
And so I would say the same about Carlos. That whole performance is like, wow, those guys are out of their minds, like into it and putting in their 110%. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, dude, for sure. So I would encourage anybody, look up a side by side of Jimi Hendrix and Morgan Freeman. And this is how the sort of industry rolls, is that some people that were famous back in the day still are famous under a different sort of character role.
Yep.
You know, and so what's like the best sort of example? Can you think of an example that is like a clear cut sort of example of that happening that people might know about? Or is he one of the better ones?
I think he's one of the better ones, especially in a photograph, because it's almost like they did very little in terms of like makeup or hair. You know, it's just sort of because Morgan Freeman didn't really come around to be famous till quite a ways later. So he was a little bit aged. So he almost had like a break there for a while. He was famously part of this 27 Club where his character got killed off at 27.
Right. Yeah.
And so after watching this documentary, I was like, well, maybe they had high hopes because he has a lot of potential. He's not a bad guitar player. He's just a little sloppy. He's like, oh, he'll get better. And then maybe he just never got better. And they're like, oh, fuck him. Let's just kill him off. And we'll make him into an actor later on down the line or something. We'll do something else with him because it's not going to work out. Somebody's going to eventually figure out he's actually not that good.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think he's one of the better ones too. I'm like going through my mind, and
Alex Jones, Bill Hicks.
Alex Jones, Bill Hicks. There you go. That's a good one.
That is a
bud.
favorite of mine, but a lot of people don't know who Bill Hicks or Alex Jones are.
It's
So
true.
It's like, if you don't know who they are, what does that mean? But if you do know who they are and you do look into it, it's like, oh wow, these guys are definitely one and the same.
I think for me personally, just because I've done more research on it, that is one of my all-time favorite one. Plus, I think it's hilarious too.
It's a funny one.
It's a funny one, and it makes so much sense when you hear Alex Jones's humor and how he fucks around like that, and he's still friends with all of the same comedians that Bill Hicks was friends with, and they're both connected with Joe Rogan and Austin, Texas, and like all this other stuff. It's just like literally, and then the teeth. Oh my god, that was really what sealed the deal for me, is seeing getting a close-up image of Bill Hicks's teeth, and then getting a close-up image of Alex Jones's teeth. And it's like, dude, anybody who saw the side-by-side comparison would know that it's the same teeth, basically.
It's similar with the Jimmy Morgan. They got like a gap tooth.
Oh, yeah, right.
And he's got sort of like a speckled, freckled face too. So
Yes.
freckles and gap teeth are hard to match up, but just so happens those two guys match up pretty dang good.
Totally. And I don't know if your feeling is still the same with Janis Joplin, but we've speculated that Janis Joplin may have been born a male, and that She lived her life as a female, and I don't know if you have much to say about that. But at one point in time, we did do a deep dive one night, deep dive, you know. And to me, it seemed very clear. But watching the documentary, I don't know. I don't know if I felt the exact same way. But what are your updated thoughts on that? And you were a huge, still are, I guess, maybe a Janis Joplin fan. So you have an emotional connection to her.
Well, I was gonna say that one hurt. That one always hurts. I mean, that's up there with like the Gwen Stefani one for me. But yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, there's also speculation where she could be Amy Goodman from NPR. There's people that think that they were switched out, that whatever. But I don't know. I mean, she's a hard one to me because Janis, because there is, I mean, if you research Janis Joplin or you read any books on her, it's pretty much openly known that she was bisexual too. And so she had, actually one of the stories is that she had her lesbian lover was with her at Woodstock, and there's actually a shot of her and another woman walking up a hill, and from my understanding from the research I've done, it was actually that's who she was with at the concert. So to me it's kind of interesting with that side of things, if there is some sort of secret tranny thing going on. I'm not sure, but there is that information about her. But, you know, I don't know. I haven't really like revisited it too much, but it's hard for me to know because I think I still do have the emotional connection to her. So it's like deep down in my heart, I don't want it to be true that that's the case. But, you know, and one of the things too is that so many people were attracted to her through her by her voice, and many even men, you know, my dad included in this one, kind of, you know, when I was younger would talk about Janis Joplin or whatever, and he said something to the effect of like, you know, she was never a beauty queen, but boy could she sing. And so, you know, that was kind of a running joke about her, that she kind of was lack of a better word, butterface kind of thing to a lot of people, where she was you know, not looked at as like a pretty woman. And that was also one of her things about her story that caused her a lot of sadness and strife, was that she always felt like she was like the ugly duckling kind of thing, outcast, never really understood sort of vibes going on there.
Right, yeah, exactly. And by the way, a butterface, just to clarify.
Sorry if I'm wrong.
No, that means that everything, like her body's great, or everything is great about her butterface.
Okay, well, I guess, yeah.
But, you know, with her, though, she kind of, she didn't even have that.
Right, yeah.
You know, like the body, you know what I mean? True. She was very, very kind of manly, actually.
Yeah, my apologies.
No need to apologize, so. Anyways, but yeah, so who knows if that one is like that or not. Do you have any opinions about Janis Joplin that way?
No, not strongly, but I think that it's definitely curious and interesting. I mean, once you delve into that topic, it's hard to not look at all sorts of celebrities in that vein, and you could be wrong, you could be right, but it's just it's confusing and bizarre, and I don't know, it makes it more fun, honestly. Suddenly I became more interested in pop culture then I was tending to want to tune it out. But now if I can look at it to pick it apart, then it's kind of more fun again.
Yeah, totally. I mean, go ahead.
I'll just give a good example. I feel pretty strongly, well, I don't know strongly. That might be too extreme or whatever. But I think there's a very good chance that Gwen Stefani is one of these celebrities. Born a male, but paraded around as a female and singing songs like I'm Just a Girl, you know, as an example. And so another one that you had emotional connections to as well. But you feel like that one still probably checks out, right?
I do. And even when we see her, you know, in media or whatever, I look at her and I'm like, oh, man, yeah, that definitely is probably the case. And it just kind of goes along with, you know, we know, I mean, just from research, how sick a lot of these media people are, the people who are running it, them, they, whatever you want to call them. It's like these people are into like dark magic, blood ritual, doing fucked up shit. So they like to work with switching genders and all this kind of stuff. So to me, it kind of checks out on that level, that they like to fuck around with stuff like that. And it's like part of their magic and part of their lineages of families that have been doing this for, centuries probably. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think that there's more realistic chances for that to be the case.
It might go as far back as, allegedly when they didn't have anything electronic going on, like your entertainment would be like a play. You'd go to a play, for example.
Yeah.
Even the women's roles were typically just men in drag. Like it was just a boys' club. And the boys were all the actors, and they played all the roles.
Right. Totally. I know. Exactly. And so for me, I know this is a sensitive topic for some people, so I don't even know if we've breached this necessarily on last Thursday at all. But to me, one of the best sort of cues or ways of looking at this is to realize how common it is now. Look at how common this is.
Yeah.
Your local hospital is turning men into women.
Right.
Okay. And so it's just like normal people, this is accessible to them now. Insurance will cover it, or there's different programs and different things that'll cover it. There's many people who are on hormones. The amount of makeup that's being sold to people who have transitioned now and all that kind of stuff, it's like through the roof and completely over the top. The thing that normal people don't understand is that this has been happening behind the scenes for a very long time. Now it's just bubbling up so much to the surface that it's like in your face mainstream now. And so it's like, think about that. It's in your face mainstream. There's teenagers who are transitioning and all this other stuff. It's like Hollywood people have been doing this for a very long time. So it's a whole history, So anyway, it's just one of those things where it does take a second to kind of come around to it, but once you do, I don't know. I think you're kind of piercing the veil a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's always like they're always cluing you in too, in like their goofy little ways. Like Gwen Stefani, for example. I remember when we were kind of like scratching our heads on that one, and then we decided to watch "I'm Just a Girl" the music video, and it's almost like that video enough. Is all the proof you need, in hilarious fashion too. Like it made me laugh out loud. It's almost like they're daring you to not realize it. That's a funny one. If you guys haven't seen, No Doubt's "I'm Just a Girl" music video, worth a watch.
Dude, even watching once we started coming around to this years ago, watching movies from like the 70s or like the 60s and stuff, like older films now, it's present. It's obvious with some of these actresses where I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is like what was going on. Even it was so funny. Oh my gosh, we were watching what's it called? Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Is that what it's called? Remember where they go down south and then they're at that bar, and then Selma Hayek's in it, and then
no, is that with who's Pulp Fiction guy? Quentin Tarantino?
He produced it, I think.
Okay.
Anyways, there's a scene. I'm pretty sure it's Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
I could be wrong.
That doesn't sound familiar.
From Dusk Till Dawn.
There you go. I was gonna say I don't.
Totally, you're right. Yeah. So From Dusk Till Dawn. Have you ever seen that? Do you remember they go to like a whole chunk of the movies at this bar?
Yeah, it's almost like two different movies.
Yeah, and once they go to the bar too, it like sucks. Yeah, in my opinion, that's what I remember at least. There's a whole scene. There's like all these strippers there, or there's all these go-go dancer sort of girls in bikinis and whatever. Dude, you look at it through this lens, dude. They're all M to Fs.
That would make sense because the movie's saying that they're not really girls anyways, right? Because they're really monsters, or so they're kind of telling you, right?
I forgot about that part.
Yes.
Totally. Dusk Till Dawn. Exactly. So, anyways, so it's present. It's a thing, but that's aside the point.
Right.
So, any other hot takes over there, baby, regarding Woodstock?
Well, with Woodstock, one of the things that I thought about, so the Manson murders at Celio Drive and the La Bianca murders were, those took place August 8th and 9th. Okay. And so in 1969, and Woodstock was literally like 2 weeks after that. So one of the things I wondered was, like, I would love to have been a fly on the wall for a lot of reasons at that festival. But like, were people talking about that, or was it a thing? There was obviously no mention in the documentary of it. It's not like they're not going to talk about like the Manson murders or whatever. But what was kind of like the mentality for people? Because the history tells us that when the Manson murders happened, that was like the first time people started locking their doors and whatever. But when we have this festival that's like, hey, we're all one and we love each other and everything else. So mentally, emotionally, what was going on, with people in that moment for everything? It makes me wonder about what's happening with that.
It could be that. I mean, look at how the news sort of cycle works or whatever. It's just like people in 20, 30 years are going to have a different idea of what it was like to live through COVID, as an example. And then having lived through it, we're going to have a different opinion about it. So maybe some of these things have been kind of exaggerated over time. How much people either cared or paid attention or how frightened they were or whatever, that could have been something that developed, over the decades. And maybe at the time, maybe it wasn't as sensational as we think, or maybe they were pumping it out and people, just weren't in a fervor about it the way that we've been kind of told that they were. I don't know.
Yeah. That could totally be a thing. And I know one of the other things we talked about was like the lack of diversity at Woodstock. And I think too, a lot of the hippie movement was a lot of like white middle class children. They came from, a lot of them seemingly came from, white middle class neighborhoods, families and stuff. And so just seeing the lack of diversity at Woodstock too. So I just think like it kind of points further to this kind of being like a targeted movement for maybe the white people in general. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But
the tickets seem cheap nowadays. Like I want to say it was like 20 something bucks to go for the weekend. But that's like, in today's money, that's like, I don't know, 100 something, $200. So that's a commitment. Like,
right.
You have to be middle class to like afford that. It's not like throwaway money.
Right.
Seems cheap now. I wish I could go to a concert nowadays for $20. But, back then, and especially if they're saying they're going to feed you and all that jazz too, like for $20, like great. All right. I'm in.
No, totally.
You could camp there too. Like awesome.
And I always think about it, from my nostalgic programming of like when I was I would have been there in a heartbeat. Like I feel like I probably would have gone, and whatever. And so anyway, there's that kind of draw to it too.
Right. So one of the things about the free food business and just with this many people, Kumbh Mela is like that too in India, where literally millions and millions of people over the course of like 2 weeks or whatever come, and you don't have to have any money. You can just come as you are, and they feed you. And I'm sure they feed you way better than what Woodstock did. But they've had hundreds and hundreds of years to refine their system and everything, obviously. But yeah, no, the suburban kid sort of thing or whatever. It's just like that is who, I mean, obviously city people as well, but it's like suburbia. It's like with this influx of television and radio media and like all of that kind of stuff, it's like they were the targets. Yeah. These people were the targets. So now it's just kind of like all of these people can be exposed to whatever they want them to be exposed to, the news and different headlines and different artists and ideas and all sorts of stuff. So for sure, they were definitely the ones that they wanted to be there. So I think it's kind of interesting that it was a West Coast thing and not an East Coast thing and not a West Coast thing.
Right.
I'm kind of wondering what's up with that too. It seems like it would have been perfect to do it on the West Coast somewhere, versus doing it over there. But I don't know. I'm sure that they didn't pick that spot for no reason.
Right. Well, it makes me wonder who is Max Yasgar, the guy who supposedly his farm it was, who allowed them to do all that. Who's that guy? How is he connected? Was he literally just the landowner and the organizers went to him and said, hey, we're doing this festival. Can we use your land? How, what does that look like?
Yeah, that was a bizarre detail that I pondered because they make it seem like they came to him and were like, "Hey, your land happens to be a perfect amphitheater, and we'd like to rent it from you." And it's like, "Oh, why were you wandering around my land, taking note of the shape of the hills?" Like, oh, okay, that's very bizarre. And so he just happened to be like a man in need. Part of the story was that it had been a rainy summer, and so they couldn't cut the hay in that field.
Oh.
Because you have to like let it dry or whatever. So it was sort of like lost money in a wasted field, and so it was a means to recuperate some funds. Because otherwise, he was a dairy farm, and he had pasture land, so he could cut grass to winter his animals, and he was not going to be able to do it that year. And so this was a way for him to make money to then buy hay.
Huh. Okay.
At least that's the story. I don't know. I don't know. I never thought about, and I never saw what they did with all the cattle. If he was a big dairy, I wonder if the cows either enjoyed the free acid or enjoyed the free music.
Well, totally. And then they interview an older couple at another point in the documentary, and this older man is like really annoyed by the festival, and he's also a dairy farmer, and talks about how, well, it's a disgrace, or it's a mess, or whatever. And he says, I'm a dairy farmer, and the milkman couldn't get through because of the cars that are jammed up on the street, so I had to throw away all my milk. So there were definitely people that they interviewed that were like not as bright-eyed, bushy-tailed about it all, and actually were more realistic about it in like the fact that no, this is actually pretty detrimental to our livelihood.
Right.
And that was, I thought, an interesting detail. I was just bringing up the older couple they interviewed who talked about having to dump their milk because the milk transport guy couldn't actually get through because of all the traffic all the cars that were literally just parked on the highway. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, dude, it would be cool to talk to someone who actually was there.
I agree.
And just pick their brain a little bit and see what their experience was. I wouldn't be surprised. We haven't done it, or I haven't done it, but you might go on YouTube and just punch it in and see if people have been interviewed within the last 5 years about their experience. That wouldn't surprise me if there's something out there like that.
No, although by this point you are talking to somebody
really old
who's
people.
Like, yeah, they're maybe in their 70s by now. And
yeah,
they
definitely.
They were just teenagers then.
Yeah,
and they were probably not sober, and so it's like, after so many decades, and especially after consuming so much media that told you how great that event was, it's easy to like look back on it with rose-tinted glasses.
Yo, yeah,
and not forget about maybe you couldn't go to the bathroom because there was like nowhere to go to the bathroom, or you were starving for days, or you were sleep deprived because you had nowhere to sleep. Who knows?
Right. Totally. One of the things I brought up, I can't even remember when, 1, 2, 3 weeks ago, something like that, is the idea that the masses are really they're used in a lot of different ways to hinder people's like individual progress, basically. And Michael Tessarian, I just feel like he put it really well, and so I always think about him talking about this stuff. But he's a big sort of proponent of individuation. So figuring out who you are, doing your shadow work, becoming self-sufficient, self-reliant, very much in line actually with the Hermit card, which is the card that corresponds with Virgo, but this return to self sort of thing, right? And so he said that basically the masses are like the last sort of thing that people will kind of like bask in and like really kind of get lost in before their true path to individuation. That there's a lot of other things, vices or habits or whatever, that people will give up, but the last thing that a lot of people give up before they actually really walk that walk is the crowd, is humanity itself. And he likened the masses to a warm sort of womb, like this warm embrace sort of thing. And so it just falls in line with the communitarian thing, this utopian idea that we can all create this thing together. and all of that. So when I see like a huge crowd like this and all of these people, you know, you feel like you're part of something, but there's a cost to that, and the cost of it is the thing you're kind of giving up is your own individuality, actually. You know, it's the same thing when it comes to society and stuff like that. So one of our friends, Rhonda, right, she has talked about many times about communitarianism, because she really looked into it, you know, and basically the whole thing behind it is that, yeah, you join a community, but you yourself are lost. Like, you're not counted in that. No one's really counted in that, because it's this huge blob sort of thing. And so the community is one of these buzzwords over the years that has been used as a weapon against the individual, you know, so it's a weaponized sort of thing. So excuse me. So it's fun to go to these shows. It's cool to be a part of something. Young people in particular, they're the most vulnerable to all of this stuff, because you're still looking for your identity, and you're going to find it in everyone else.
Well, so everybody at this concert just got labeled a hippie.
Yeah,
right. But then somebody else is going to define then what a hippie is, and so you're gonna swallow that pill and be like, all right, yeah, I'm a hippie, and then all of a sudden you start getting told, well, hippies buy this music, and this is how you dress, and these are your preferred drugs to use, and you're like, oh, okay, sounds good, sign me up.
Right.
right, totally. So anyways, so there's all of that. Also too, I noticed Richie Havens, he was like one of the first guys that performed, right? The first, yeah. He one of his songs, he was repeating freedom, and then the second song he also mentions freedom as well, and that was kind of like a thing, right? There was an anti-war sentiment, obviously, throughout the whole entire show. But I thought it was just kind of interesting, him saying freedom a couple times. First off, I didn't think it was very creative. So there's that. But then also, too, the implication is that you're not free. You know, that's what he's telling people, too, kind of subliminally, subconsciously, is that you're not free, so you need to fight for freedom, sort of thing.
The funny part about that story is, if you're not aware, he was the first to go on, and it was just because he was the only one there.
Really?
Like, people couldn't get to the show, so like the acts hadn't shown up yet, and it was like hours into the show, and he was supposed to go on fifth, and so he's like waiting around for other people to, you know, go on, and they're like, "Will you go on?" And he's like, no, "I'm supposed to go on fifth. Like, I don't want to go on yet. I don't want to be the first," because he also kind of knew that the crowd would be restless because everybody's waiting for this show and nobody's going on.
Interesting.
And so nobody wanted to be first, and nobody was also there, so they got him to go on, and then he did a set, and then he walks off, and they were like, actually, there's nobody here. Like, can you go do an encore? And he literally says 6 times he left the stage, and they said, no, please go back.
What?
So
really?
He ended up playing for like over 2 hours, or around 2 hours, out of necessity, because nobody else was ready or there. And so that freedom song is the last song he played, and that was literally, he says, he played every song he knew, and he was just winging it and making shit up on the fly. So
my God.
He just didn't know what to say or what to do. So he's just like making that song up as it goes. And I watched an interview with him later as like an adult, and he said he had to watch the documentary to remember how the song went, because he didn't really like write the song. He just kind of made it up. But then the documentary sort of made it a hit on its own. And so he had to then like kind of learn his own song from watching him like make it up on the fly.
Oh, that's funny. I had no idea. I didn't know about that context. Yeah. So the only thing I took away was what I mentioned, right? Was the freedom thing of just like implying that you're all caged and, you know.
Well, so here he is singing about freedom, but he wasn't even allowed to leave the stage.
I was just going to say, yeah, exactly. Dude, that's funny. So anyway, yeah, there was another guy too. I mean, he was barking orders at people to clap or something like that. I think I remember the first time we saw that. I felt like there was like more directions that he was telling people, almost like a drill instructor or something like that.
Right.
It didn't come across that strongly the second viewing though. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if certain people obviously were kind of like tasked to go up on stage and like, you know, bark orders at people to do certain things and see how well they were going to, you know, follow those demands and stuff like that.
Right.
So, yeah. So we're at hour 42. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to chat about here? Any hanging chads or loose ends? Let me check my notes because I wrote down a few things.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of covered most of the stuff that stood out to me actually. But again, I mean, I just really do. I think that this was a grand experiment to see what people will endure, what happens when they're pushed to the limits, and I think, 2020 is another example of that, where we're kind of like, what are they going to do? We're going to do this to them. We're going to put vaccines out. We're going to make them stay home. What will they do? How many will do this? How many will do that? I think that this is like the running theme of so many things that happen to us here. In my opinion, and this is just one of the more bigger successful runs that they've had, really, in my opinion, because I think that they were able to gather a lot of information about humanity through this festival. Because even if they don't talk too much about the violence or whatever, maybe there was violence and stuff, but maybe there wasn't as much or whatever. I know that it's portrayed that it was just a peaceful thing and only 2 people died. Someone got ran over by a tractor or something, they say, and then there's like one other person.
The hamburger stand.
One overdose and one tractor accident.
There you go. And then they had babies born and stuff like that. So I think that that's probably a farce, seeing as how many people were there, and they were saying that it was like the second largest city in New York for that day, or for those 3 days. It was the second largest city in New York. So you're trying to say that there was only 2 deaths in that whole thing. I don't know. I find that hard to believe, but that's what the mainstream narrative is. So I don't know.
Maybe one thing I'll say is that what I feel like I've noticed is that with orchestrated events that are like propaganda campaign sort of adjacent or related or whatever, that not everything goes off perfectly. So I think you can kind of plan for some sort of event, and you might have an agenda with it or whatever, but it may not go exactly as planned. And so things happen that are kind of organic, I think, that you kind of can't anticipate or whatever. And so it seems like this event was kind of like that. So when you're decoding an event and you think it's a hoax event, some of the things were planned for, and then some of the things I think happened and unfurled kind of naturally because it's a real event. It's almost like planning a concert or a play or something like that. It's like things happen, someone trips or they forget their line or something like that, So I think that this might be one of those things. Not everything went off without a hitch, I don't think. Just like unless maybe that was planned for or whatever, this guy performing for as long as he did, right. I don't know, was that something that they anticipated and planned for or not? I don't know, but I bet it's a mixture of the two.
Yeah, for sure.
Calculated things, but then uncalculated things happen, right? So, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have anything else to say. What about you, Pedro?
The only thing is it kind of sent me down a rabbit hole re-looking at it was the next summer, in the summer of 70 in Oregon, they had Vortex 1.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, if Woodstock is the blueprint, let me revisit this Vortex 1 thing again. And the YouTube algorithm just recommended me this OPB, like public broadcasting special documentary on Vortex 1. So it's going to be like very much the Wikipedia version of the story. And that alone, I was like, wow, actually, it's super fascinating, the amount of information that's like readily available, how bizarre that whole story was. And for those that don't know, there in 1970 in Oregon, they put together a concert, and I think it's still to this day, it's the only state-sponsored concert that's ever happened in the United States. Like the state paid for it, put it all together, organized it, provided everything, basically. And then, but some of the details was just very bizarre. It was like the day leading up to like the event, they like canceled a music festival supposed to happen in Wilsonville, I think, like an hour away, and then we're just busing and trucking people to this new concert that the government happened to put together for them out in Estacada. And so they were doing things like the cops were instructed that day not to give out parking or tickets. Like if you pulled somebody over, they were then escorting people to go to this concert.
Whoa.
In lieu of getting a ticket, you were getting escorted to a free concert where they were going to feed you.
Huh.
And they just so happened to have vats of LSD-laced wine, and the government just so happens to have medical tents set up, and a lot of very bizarre details. Like the guy who set it up, he even says they strategically picked the park that they did it at because the way it is like situated against a river, it like contains everybody against a river. And then there's just like this one road in that's steep hill. And so they set the military up on top of the hill, brought everybody down the one road in, and then everybody was just stuck with a river as a border. So everybody was just sort of naturally fenced into this area and under a watchful eye while they all got a free concert. And the quick story is just that they were afraid of riots in Portland. So they we'll give all the kids a free concert and then they won't be mad anymore. And that's like the story, right? And it's just like, wow, it's just one of these bizarre events. It's like it definitely feels like they tried another smaller local Woodstock, here in Oregon, and it had its success and it has its bizarre story to go along to it. So yeah, that was one of my takeaways too. Is just it made me rethink Vortex 1 and relook at that with a new lens. That's just another topic.
Yeah, no, totally.
Well, and then that makes me think, do you remember when we were at David's farm for the potluck and that older guy was there and he was part of Vortex? And he talked about how he was like in charge of the food or whatever. And Tim, our good friend, not to be putting all these names out there, but we have a couple of really good friends who have researched it. And then another good friend who actually was there, Gregory. And Tim had a lot of questions for this guy because he knew the name of one of the senators or somebody that was involved in the government. And the guy that we were talking to that was involved with the food stuff, he goes, oh yeah, that was him. He like set up our van and he set up the bus for the food and everything. And so I don't remember even that guy's name that was there, but it was interesting that we got like another insight into somebody that actually had their hands in this festival, and he was like a old hippie that hung out with Ken Kesey and had taken LSD and was in San Francisco for a while and stuff. And so I don't know who that guy was besides friends with David, but he had his hands in the Vortex thing too.
Yeah, one thing I learned about Vortex is so in downtown Portland, which again is about an hour away from this festival, they were having an event in Portland, and it was like they were expecting war protesters, but I'm not quite sure what the event was for. An outdoor whatever to probably promote for the war. But they set up a war room and like a high level, like the Hilton Hotel downtown Portland, like in one of the upper stories where you're like looking down at the town, and they had like to the degree of like having miniature models and stuff of like the park and like town, and they were observing the rioters and observing the ongoings of this concert festival from the war room in downtown Portland. And so the people in this room were allegedly like the governor, the mayor, the senators, the people like setting this up. And so yeah, they had like direct contact with the military, and they were keeping like an eye on everything going on. And it's like it's clearly it's not just a concert in the park. Wow. It's a lot of effort and a lot of eyes being put onto the story. Damn.
Yeah. Interesting. I love that story though of Vortex. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
We didn't like specifically get into it, kind of, sort of, but just imagining, we know that a lot of shows, a lot of festivals, the drug dealers are the biggest winners.
Oh yeah.
They make bank. And so to be able to know how much was made off of Woodstock, how much acid was produced or whatever, who the drug dealers were, who the chemists were, how much pot was smoked, all that kind of stuff would be pretty mind-blowing to kind of have.
So the highway is a parking lot, and people have to like park and walk in for miles. They couldn't get the food. They couldn't even get the damn bands to the place, but
the acid got there.
Acid got there, and the hash was there, and all the drugs were there. Like that was no problem.
Yep.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. So anyways, that's pretty trippy.
It shows you
think
what
about
the priorities probably were. Then.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, and that again, it goes back to my assumption of Wavy Gravy being a main drug vein guy of infiltrating the drugs within and being a trafficker of them and stuff, and knowing his connection with Ken Kesey and the LSD from a long time ago. And I encourage people to look into Wavy Gravy. His name is Hugh Romney. That's his actual name, Hugh Romney Jr. And one of the things that I wrote down, did I write it down? I hope I did. There's a documentary out about him that came out a handful of years ago, but it is, man, I thought I wrote it down. Oh, there it is. It's called Captain Misbehavin'. Which is creepy to me. And his whole thing is this clown getup, and I think it's really interesting too, like the dance troupe sort of weird shit that was really popular in the 60s, the performance art. And he's one of the main people that's known for that. He's known for that. That's one of his things. But he's known as a clown, and he dresses up like a clown, and he's a hippie, and he worked with the Grateful Dead and everything else. So anyway, if you're not familiar with Wavy Gravy, I recommend a dive on him because there's some questionable behaviors for sure.
Another random overlap with this Vortex is they had a commune running stuff at Vortex too. This commune was called The Family, but I don't know anything about them. Other than just to be like, oh, so here's a state-sponsored event where you have like the National Guard there, but they're not capable of like organizing. Like you have to have some random commune people like take over things.
Right,
it just
weird.
Seems like, well, who are these commune people? Because I know we've kind of like looked into other cults and things and wondered like who are these people, how real or not real are some of these cults, and like really what's going on there. And I think it just kind of lends to these are things that should be questioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess one of the last things I'm thinking about here is, throughout this whole entire Summer of Love thing, I've kept technology in mind, right? And how influential technology was throughout this whole entire decade, kind of like what you mentioned earlier, how it really changed the game, television, radio, all that stuff. And then Jimi Hendrix and The Who in particular, really kind of using the electric guitar and its tone and noise and reverb and stuff like that to like great effect. They're really kind of making that like a key piece of their playing and stuff like that, right? And so I always just think about the evolution of rock and roll, being more of a metal guy, and just thinking about like things getting progressively heavier and faster and noisier and stuff like that. And how probably listening to The Who, as an example, live back then probably was like an experience.
Oh, I mean, even listening into it like now recently was like, oh, this is pretty aggressive. Like,
yeah,
they
right?
are pretty aggressive.
Totally. Or even I always think too, because we did the Beatles episode, Helter Skelter as a song, of just being like, damn, this is pretty aggressive too, for the time. Yeah, for sure.
You forget, like without that context goggles, you forget.
Right. So then thinking about that and hearing all these kids listening to all of this stuff, and then thinking about, well, what are the shows that actually get a draw today? And it's all electronic. And so now the amount of noise and how glitchy it can be, how electric sounding it can be, how loud it can be, all of this stuff is like super next level extreme. And then also too, literally the sound system and then the visual aspect of everything and the screens and the light show and everything else, it's like completely nuts, And so on occasion I do check out like these huge sets and stuff from these big DJs and whatever, playing around the world to tons and tons of people. This is like the genre that draws now.
Yeah.
This is what's going to get a lot of people out there and in the crowd, and they're doing drugs, and the drugs are also more synthetic now. Acid was a lab created thing, and so now it's just kind of like everything that was kind of established with Woodstock, it's just like taken to the next level now, obviously, on so many different levels. So then you're tripping balls, and there's a fucking like, owl, and there's all these, it's a crazy light show and all these screens, and it's like really psychedelic now, and the music is too. And so anyway, so just kind of thinking about the evolution of things, I guess, of like what these kids were experiencing back then, what kids would be experiencing now, even the weed too. When they were smoking and stuff like that, I thought about it. I'm like, well, it's not today's weed.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not indoor grown or whatever, or some guy was smoking hash or whatever. It's like today they would be dabbing, and so they'd be smoking
Right.
concentrates. That was their concentrate back then,
Uh-huh.
but now it would be like next level. So everything is just kind of like has been taken to the next gear,
Sure.
I guess.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
just thinking about all that stuff right now. But
Right.
I think that'll do it for me.
Yeah. I think me too. I will say though, when I'm watching the documentary for the music, I mean, Woodstock, when I see some of those artists, it is one of the documentaries or one of the some of the performances that still make me like want to be able to at one point in my life like be up on stage and like go fucking nuts. Because it's like some of them sounded so good and then other bands did not sound very good, but the ones that sounded good and did well, it was like holy crap, it was like some of their best performances. And so there's something about it that nostalgia still came through for me regardless of whatever the hell it was. I still can appreciate, what was going on there musically with some of these people. So, anyway.
Totally. No, exactly. Well, now, again, just to kind of add on to what I just said, the draw now isn't even a band.
Right.
It's a guy with a laptop.
Yeah, right.
And so it's just kind of wild too, just how far we've come. Okay, so check this out. So Moonlander, Tattoo Dave, late, but I just remembered Jim Morrison became Rush Limbaugh. So
That's a good one.
that's another one too, worth looking into. It's
That is a
interesting.
good one.
Nice. So should we address the chat and just say hi to people real quick before we bounce here?
Sure.
Cool. What's up? Either Elise or James. And those festivals are crazy. I used to go to them all the time. And man, it felt like brainwashing. That's why I stopped going. I got too high and looked around like, what the fuck is everyone doing here? Yeah. Well, us too. I mean,
Yeah.
we went to one literally, and it was a thing. And we could not hang, basically.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of big outdoor concerts. Sometimes, like, you go a band or two is fine, but all day I was so exhausted by the end of the day. And maybe it was because I was relatively sober, but it's like I wasn't into like hanging out there for, especially not days on end. Like I got hungry, I got tired, I got cranky. It was an ordeal. And but compare that to just like a small venue where you're just seeing one or two bands play and you're in and out in a couple hours. Like that's great. That's a great experience. But the big, huge over the top festivals is not my scene.
Right. I know, watching Woodstock, the documentary thing, I was just like, I'm exhausted. Seriously. Just watching these people there. So hello, my Cherie. Thank you for hanging out, as always. Interesting. Deadheads were the first to use the internet, the DeadNet. I haven't heard of that. I wouldn't be surprised, though. Walk and Talk, what's up? I can't say your name because I don't know what that is. What's up, Kabir? Elliot James has been hanging out. What's good? Live Creative Coloring Day. Hello. And Lindsay has been hanging out too. So you guys are appreciated. Cozy Crone, what's going on? But I think that's going to do it for us, guys. But before we take off here, we do have some things to announce. Once again, thank you to all of the patrons. And if you guys want to support the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/thehealinghome or patreon.com/symbolic studies. Ooh, this is a good one. But you should talk about it. So Michelle's going to interview this author, Neil Sanders, about the Manson mythos on Tuesday. It's an earlier time slot than usual. But yeah, what do you want to say about that real quick?
Just mostly want to say I'm really excited for this one. And Neil Sanders is a guy who I really respect, especially when it comes to the Manson research. that he's done. He really opened up other doors for me in terms of seeing this whole story from different angles. So we're going to go live at 10 a.m. this coming Tuesday on the 19th because he's over in London, actually, I believe. United Kingdom, nonetheless. So we're on a different time zone. But you know what? I'm so pumped for this. And I've wanted to talk to him for so many years. And the fact that he actually even responded to me and said yes is huge. So come join us for that one. It's going to be real, real good. Full Moon Offering newsletter. The next issue comes out on the 29th of September. So look for that. You can sign up for the newsletter if you're not already online with that at my website, michelleshealinghome.com. Right now, I still have 2 of my skin and wound salvation balms left. And if you're interested in that, you can email me. This salve is awesome. It is a tried and true recipe that I've been making for almost a decade now, and I really love it. It is formerly known as my antifungal and wound healing salve. So for people who have maybe purchased that in the past, I just changed the name. It's the same formula. I felt like it was time for a name change. So that is the deal with that. I'm also still taking pre-orders for shampoo bars if anyone's interested. I made a couple batches because I had a handful of people reach out to me asking for shampoo. So I went ahead and made some, and I've had a lot of people actually pre-order. So if you're interested in getting your hands on some shampoo, you can pre-order and prepay. And then once they're fully cured, I'll be sending them out to everybody. And up on the screen is my current menu. You can nix off the salt soap because that's sold out, but everything else that you see up there is available for purchase. And michelleshealinghome@gmail.com for orders and any questions you have, michelleshealinghome.com if you want to just check out my website and see what's going on there. You can also call or text me 503-568-1569. And here we are, last Thursday. So, I'll hand it over to Mario.
Of course, symbolicstudies.com for all of my stuff. I actually am going live on Saturday with Longo at Old World, Florida. So we have yet to decide on a topic, but I got the invite and I said I'm down. So that'll be streamed to my channel for sure. So look out for that. And I think that'll do it. Cool, guys. Until next time, this was fun. Pedro, thank you for being here, dude.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. You guys can find me at the Hot Springs, or maybe on maybe on Instagram in the background of somebody's pictures.
Right.
Otherwise, no social media for me, but I appreciate being here. And sometimes you'll see me in the chat too. I'm usually on my cell phone listening in, and so having a screen that's half cell phone and half chat is like I'm useless for chat, but I'll stop in and say hi from time to time. And
yeah, totally.
I'm usually listening in, so it's fun and happy to be here.
Totally, hell yeah. Also, you're going to be joining us on our way to Vegas for Flattoberfest.
Yeah. Yes.
So there's at least a couple of people who watch this who definitely are going. So if you recognize Pedro,
I'll be there. You can see me in the flesh. Just like these guys.
yeah, totally. All right, guys. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.